From George Ivanovich Gurdjieff, All and Everything. Chapter 43. Beelzebub's Survey of the Process of the Periodic Reciprocal Destruction of Men, or Beelzebub's Opinion of War. In general, in consequence of the fact that every kind of data for individual manifestation have already quite ceased to be crystallized in most of these three-brained beings who have taken your fancy, particularly the contemporary ones, and they manifest themselves only according to the dictates of the consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer. They therefore do not like to occupy themselves with such affairs, which are within their reason and within their power, but occupy themselves always with decisions of such questions which are incomparably higher than their reason. Thanks to this feature of their strange psyche, one other peculiar and in the highest degree strange psychic organic need had been formed in them during the last 20 centuries. The chief manifestation of just this psychic organic need of theirs consists in this, that each of them must always, of necessity, as they say, teach others sense, or put them on the right road. Do you know, my boy, my mentioning this exceptional feature of their character, inherent in all of them without exception, leads me to the thought of the desirableness of explaining to you at this point about their strange psyche, and to give you the advice, like that which that good old fellow, our Ahun, already once gave you, when I ended my explanation about the contemporary terrestrial illustrious art. He then said, among other things, that if for some reason or other you happen to exist there on the planet Earth, and to mix with these strange three-brained beings, then you must always be very careful with those contemporary types there who are called representatives of art, and never offend them, and thus not make violent enemies among them. At that time, our dear Ahun, bearing in mind their numerous weaknesses, such as their self-love, pride, vanity, and still many others, indicated to you in which cases just which of these specific properties of theirs it was necessary, as he expressed it, to tickle. He even then explained to you in detail about what and how it was necessary to speak to them, so that they should always have good relations with you, and so that they should always and everywhere praise you and only speak good about you. Concerning this advice of his, I can say nothing bad. It cannot be denied. It is ideal for the types he mentioned. These contemporary representatives of art, there, in fact, have in great abundance the specific properties enumerated by our dear Ahun, and if on each occasion you tickle these particular properties of theirs, they will indeed worship you, and in everything always behave towards you, not worse than those who were called there XLIII slaves. But though this advice of his is excellent and even indispensable for existence among them, I personally do not consider it practical for you. Not practical in the first place because, since not all the beings of the earth are like representatives of art, this advice does not apply to all of them in general. And secondly, because it will be inconvenient for you always to have to remember all these numerous particularities, and each time to stop and think on which occasion which of these numerous weaknesses of theirs must be tickled. I wish to point out to you one great secret of their psyche, namely, I wish to point out to you only one particularity of theirs which, if you know how to profit by it, might create in each one of them the same effect in their manifestations about which Ahun spoke. If you will act upon them through this same particularity, then you will not only be on very good terms with them all, but even, if you wish, you will be able, knowing the secret of their psyche, fully to ensure your tranquil and happy existence there, both as regards money, necessarily required there, as well as other conveniences, the taste and blissful significance of which our dear teacher expressed by the words, "Roses, roses." You, no doubt, my boy, have already guessed that by this secret of their psyche, I refer just to this same, as I called it, psycho-organic need of theirs to teach others sense and to put them on the right road. This special property formed in their psyche, thanks, of course, also always to the same abnormally established conditions of ordinary being existence, becomes, as it were, when each one of them already becomes a responsible being, an obligatory part of his presence. Everyone there, without exception, has this psycho-organic need, old and young, men and women, and even those whom they call prematurely born. The mentioned particular need of theirs arises in them, in its turn, thanks to another particular property of theirs, which is that from the very moment when each of them acquires the capacity of distinguishing between wet and dry, then, carried away by this attainment, he ceases forever to see and observe his own abnormalities and defects, but sees and observes those same abnormalities and defects in others. It has already become customary there at the present time that all your favorites always teach others like themselves, even things the notion of which they have not even dreamed of, and the joke of it is that if these others do not learn from him, or at least do not pretend that they wish to learn, then they are not only offended, but even always inwardly very sincerely indignant. And on the contrary, if one of these others should learn sense from them, or at least pretend that he is very anxious to learn it, then these beings will not only love and respect him, but will feel fully satisfied and greatly delighted. It must be remarked here that only in these circumstances can your favorites speak about others without malice and without criticism. And so, my boy, I strongly advise you that if for any reason you have to exist among them, always pretend that you wish to learn something from them. Act in the same way towards their children, and then you will not only be on excellent terms with them all, but the whole family will even look on you as the honored friend of the house. Always remember that any one of them, however insignificant he himself may be in essence, looks down, owing always to his self-conceit ensuing from this particular property, with contempt upon the conduct and actions of others, especially if their conduct and actions sharply contradict his own subjectively established point of view. And in these cases he, as I have already said, usually becomes inwardly sincerely offended and indignant. I might as well here remark that, thanks to this property of your favorites always to grow indignant at the defects of others around them, they make their existence, already wretched and abnormal without this, objectively unbearable. Thanks to this constant indignation, the ordinary being existence of these unfortunates flows almost always with unproductive, what are called moral sufferings. And these futile moral sufferings of theirs continue, as a rule, by momentum, to act for a very long time on their psyche, so to say, semzekionally, or, as they would say there on your planet, depressingly. That is, they ultimately become, of course, without the participation of their consciousness, instruarian, or, as they would say, nervous. And then they become, in the process of their ordinary being existence, completely uncontrolled, even in those being manifestations of theirs, which have nothing in common with the primary causes which have evoked this instruarness or nervousness of theirs. Only thanks to this property of theirs alone, to be indignant at the defects of others, their existence has become gradually even arch-tragic comic. For instance, at every step there you meet a picture of this sort. These freaks lose, so to say, that outer mask which, thanks to the same maleficent means existing there, called education, most of them have little by little learned to wear from their childhood, and thanks to which they can very well conceal their genuine inner and outer, trifling significance from others. And in consequence, they automatically become slaves of others to the degree of humiliation. Or as they themselves say there, they fall as regards all their inner experience under somebody's thumb. For instance, under the thumb of wife or mistress, or of such another who by some means has ferreted out the inner insignificance of the given terrestrial being, and thus the latter ceases to have for them this artificial mask. And indeed, it is just such a terrestrial being under somebody's thumb who, as a rule, is more indignant than anyone else at other beings of their planet, as for instance at some king who for some reason or other is unable to keep in submission tens or hundreds of thousands of his community. And it is just such beings who are under somebody's thumb who usually write various manuals in which they show in detail how and what must be done for the good government of others. Or again, when one of the contemporary beings of this peculiar planet, whose heart, as they say, always sinks into his boots, from fright, when, for instance, a mouse runs past him, learns that so-and-so, on meeting a tiger, felt a little timid, then this hero will be inwardly extremely indignant with him, and will, without fail, in conversation with his friends, foaming at the mouth, denounce him, and prove that he is a vile, criminal, coward, for having been frightened by such a mere tiger. And yet again, the various books and manuals concerning also what must be done, and how and what must not be done, on meeting a tiger or other similar being, are written by these mouse-unflinching heroes there. Or further, one of them who has a score of various, as it is said there, chronic diseases, thanks to which for whole weeks at a time his stomach does not work, and his whole body is covered with all kinds of malignant pimples, from which diseases he of course suffers day and night. In short, such a being there, who for many years has been a genuine walking anatomical museum of all the diseases existing on that planet, is always more indignant than anyone else when someone has carelessly caught, let us say, a cold. And these walking anatomical museums there invariably instruct others with great authority how to get rid of this cold, and it is precisely they alone who write various books and manuals concerning all kinds of other diseases there, and expound in minute detail how to guard against and get rid of them. At every step, one might also observe such an absurdity as this. One of them, who even does not know in the least what that ordinary tiny being, which often bites him, called flea, looks like, writes a huge volume, or draws up a special what is called popular lecture, that the flea whose bite made the neck of a certain historical king, Nokon, swell, had on its left paw an abnormal orange-crimson growth of a peculiar strange form. Well then, if this expert in fleas there will write his voluminous work, or if he will read for a whole evening his popular lecture on the orange-crimson growth, on the mentioned flea, then if anyone will not believe him and will express his doubt to his face, he will not only be offended, but even greatly indignant, and he will be indignant chiefly because this somebody is such a what is called ignoramus, that he has even not yet heard anything about the truths communicated to him by this expert. Thanks to all the aforementioned, such pictures are met with at every step there on your planet in the existence of these strange three-brained beings, that only from observing and studying them, every normal being existing there, if he will indeed take in and study his perceptions, might become fully instructed in all branches of general objective science. For the satisfying of your favorites, astonishingly strange need I mentioned, as is said there, not to suffer, they must always have at least one victim for their teachings. But among a number of them who have acquired for some reason or other in these manifestations of theirs a certain authority over others, and who have become in consequence, by increasing habit, more impotent. The appetite grows to the point of acquiring an always greater number of these victims. Yes, my boy, when you will exist among them and will be a witness of these incongruous being manifestations, then, even in spite of the fact that you know the cause of these incongruities, you will be unable, as they express it, not to laugh inwardly, and at the same time, with the whole of your being, you will pity these unfortunates, and with your inner laughter there will gradually be mixed by itself what is called an essence Palnasurian grief. The same particularity of the psyche of the three-centered beings there is especially strongly developed there among the beings belonging to their caste, called the intelligentsia. The word intelligentsia itself almost denotes that notion there which we define by the words force in oneself. Yet, though by its essence the word intelligentsia has there almost the same sense, nevertheless the beings there, particularly the contemporary ones, for some reason or other, call by this word just those beings who are the exact opposite of what this word denotes. The word intelligentsia is also taken from the ancient Greek language. It is interesting to notice that this same word was used also by the Romans, but having taken it from the Greeks, not by its sense but by its sound, they later imagined that the roots of this word belonged to their own language. But among the ancient Greeks, this word denoted a being so perfected that he was already able to direct his functions as he wished, and not, for instance, as occurs with every what is called inanimate cosmic formation, every action of which proceeds only as a reaction to external causes. Such beings, no doubt, are also still met with there on your planet as approximately answer to this sense of the word, but only among those contemporary beings of the planet Earth who are considered, according to the understanding of most of the beings there, as unintelligent. In my opinion, if those beings, especially of the most recent times, who are called there intelligentsia, would simply be called mechanohentsia, then perhaps this would be more correct. It would be more correct because the contemporary intelligentsia there can themselves not only give absolutely no direction at all to their being functions, but there are already finally atrophied in them even those data for impulses of essence initiative, for daily being existence, which in general are always placed by Great Nature herself in all three-centered beings at their arising. During their responsible existence, these intelligentsia beings there always act or manifest only when they receive corresponding shocks from outside, and it is these same shocks proceeding from outside which give them the possibility of becoming correspondingly animated and of experiencing only through the unrolling of the series of former corresponding automatic perceptions already present in them and not depending at all on their own wish or will. And these external shocks of theirs for the said kind of experiencing are usually in the first place animate or inanimate things accidentally coming within the sphere of their organs of perception of visibility. Secondly, the various beings they meet. Thirdly, the sounds or words reverberating where they happen to be. Fourthly, sense, accidentally perceived by their sense of smell. And finally, unaccustomed sensations that proceed from time to time during the functioning of their planetary body, or as they say, their organism, and so on. But never do their outer manifestations in general, nor those inner being impulses of theirs, which ought to be under the directive of their being, I, proceed according to their own wish, resulting from the whole of their entire presence. I must here tell you further that certain of those terrestrial intelligensics, in whom, during the period of their responsible existence, certain already established forms of their inner functioning have, for various reasons, become definitely changed, are no longer called by the other terrestrial beings intelligensics, but are given other names composed of different words, or more exactly of the roots of the words of ancient Greek. Namely, they name them bureaucrats, plutocrats, theocrats, democrats, zevocrats, aristocrats, and so on. The first of the names enumerated, namely bureaucrats, is given to those intelligensics, in whom the series of their ordinary automatic associations, already present in them, which engender experiencings, are limited. That is to say, however varied the shocks coming from without may be, associations are evoked in these bureaucrats of always the same experiencings, which, thanks to the frequent repetition, acquire their own specific character and manifest quite independently, without the participation of any separate spiritualized being part whatsoever of their common presence. And as regards the beings of the second of the enumerated states, that is, those who also, after a certain transformation of their psyche, are called by other beings plutocrats, then to the beings thus called, those of the intelligensics, there are promoted who previously, during the period of their responsible existence, were able very artistically to get all the honest, that is, naive, fellow countrymen of theirs they came across into their toils, thanks to which they become the owners of a great quantity of what is called there money and slaves. Here bear in mind that it is just from these terrestrial types that most Hosnamus individuals arise. When I was there during my investigations of the questions which interested me, I chanced to learn the secret of the origin of this word, plutocrat. As I have already told you, during the last 25 centuries there, every suspicious notion and every suspicious thing has for some reason or other been called by ancient Greek words. Likewise, these names as bureaucrats, aristocrats, democrats, and so on, which express in themselves suspicious notions, are also composed of two ancient Greek words. For instance, the word bureaucrat consists of two words, buro, which means chancellery, and crat, which means to keep or to hold. And both of these words together mean those who manage or keep the whole chancellery. And as regards the word plutocrat, it seems that the history of its origin is somewhat different and does not go very far back. This word was formed only 7 or 8 of their centuries ago. Although these types already existed in ancient Greece, also yet they were then called their plutocrats. Several centuries ago, however, when many of these types were developed there, and when it became clear that the other beings of the earth had somehow to dignify them with a title, then those beings there, who at that time were in charge of such questions, invented for them this name plutocrat. It seems that they then deliberated and pondered a very long time precisely what name to invent for them. They deliberated and pondered a long time because they already very well understood that these types on their planet are scoundrels of the deepest dye, and already, so to say, saturated by every kind of Hosnamusness to the marrow of their bones. At first, in order to dignify them, they wished to invent some or other very forceful word corresponding to their inner significance. But later they became afraid of doing so, because these terrestrial types, thanks to what is called ill-gotten gains, had already then acquired force and power, far greater perhaps than that of their kings. And they were afraid that if they dignified them by just such a word as would define their real significance, then they might be greatly offended and begin to do still more harm to the other beings. And therefore they ultimately decided to be cunning and invented this word, thanks to which they could call them by their real name and at the same time appear to dignify them. The mentioned beings of that time achieved this in the following way. As the title of these terrestrial types had of course also to be composed of two ancient Greek words, and as all such names have the ancient Greek word krat as their second half, then, in order that the new word might not strike anyone's eye, they left in it this same ancient Greek consonants. The first half, however, of this word was not taken from the ancient Greek, as was usually done, but from the what is called Russian language. Namely, they took the Russian word plut. In Russian, plut means rogue, and in this way obtained plutocrat. These terrestrial beings then indeed attained their aim as perfectly as possible, because at the present time there on your planet, both these terrestrial parasites themselves and also all the other beings of the earth are quite content with this title. These terrestrial monsters are so satisfied with their title that out of swagger they go about in top hats, even on weekdays. And the other terrestrial beings are also satisfied, since they call these freaks by their genuine names, not only without making them angry, but even causing them to strut like turkey cocks. As regards the third of the names I enumerated, namely theocrats, by this title those intelligensics there were then dignified, in whose common presences, in the psycho-organic sense, there proceeded almost the same perturbation as in those who became plutocrats. The difference between the plutocrats and the theocrats there is only this, that the first act upon their surroundings for the satisfaction of their Hasnamusian needs, through that function which is called among them trust, while the second act through that function which has gradually replaced in your favorites the sacred function that serves all the three-brained beings as one of the three sacred paths for self-perfecting, and this function they called by the name faith. In order that you should obtain a more complete notion about these theocrats, it will be sufficient if I relate to you once more one of the sayings of our highly esteemed Mullah Nasr ad-Din. Concerning these theocrats there, he once uttered something very strange. Namely, he said, "Isn't it all one to the poor flies how they are killed? By a kick of the hooves of horned devils, or by a stroke of the beautiful wings of divine angels?" And concerning those types there, whom all others call democrats, it is first of all necessary to tell you that these types there do not always come from the, so to say, hereditary intelligensics. For the greater part, they, in the first place, happen to be simple, ordinary terrestrial beings, and only afterwards, when they chance to become intelligensics, and when, with functions present in them, degenerated, also from the sacred function of conscience, almost the same proceeds in them as among the future plutocrats and theocrats, they are transformed into just these democrats. Here, it might as well be remarked that when some of these democrats, for some reason or other, occasionally occupy the places of the power-possessing beings, then a very, very rare cosmic phenomenon sometimes occurs from their actions, namely, as Mullah Nasr ad-Din says, the very corns turn pedicures. And this rare phenomenon occurs, in my opinion, because when the democrats there chance to occupy the places of the power-possessing beings, they have in themselves no inherited aptitudes at all for instinctively being able to direct others, and in consequence they are quite unable to direct the existence of beings who happen to be in their power. Our priceless teacher Mullah Nasr ad-Din has also for these terrestrial types a corresponding sentence. Each time he recites it, he first raises his arms to heaven, and only then with great reverence pronounces, "Thanks be to thee, great and just Creator, that by thy abundant and just grace it is so ordained that cows do not fly like pretty little birds." Now, my boy, from the various intelligensics enumerated by me, it remains for me to tell you about those terrestrial types whom the other beings call xevrocrats and aristocrats, who are distinguished by the cognomens given to them, such as Emir, Count, Khan, Prince, Melik, Baron, and so on, the consonants of which, for some reason or other, acts extremely pleasantly on that function of your favorites, which is always very strongly expressed in them, which remains in them up to their very death, and which is called vanity. And I must frankly confess to you that it is very difficult to explain about these types there, not only in ordinary speech, but also in the language of our most wise Mullah Nasr ad-Din. The most we can say of them is that they are simply jokes of nature. Still, I must say that although both these types there, among your favorites, are called differently, yet in fact these same aristocrats and xivocrats are similar in every respect and have exactly identical inner properties. Remember, I've already told you that there, on your planet, in various communities, there exist two kinds, as is said there, of state organization. One is called a monarchic state organization, and the other a republican. In the communities where a republican state organization exists, these types are called xivocrats. But where a monarchic state organization exists, they are called aristocrats. Trying to give you at least some notion about these two terrestrial types, I think it will be best if I tell you about one of my embarrassments which occurred to me every time when, being on your planet, I accidentally happened to meet these misconceptions. At chance meetings with them, one thing chiefly surprised me. How could this kind of terrestrial three-brained type exist on your peculiar planet almost as long as the other three-brained beings there? Such a question was evoked in me by the beings there who belonged to the caste of the bureaucrats. Yet, nevertheless, as regards them, one might still explain this to you, at least, more or less. Although the series of experiencings in them is also very limited, yet at any rate they actually have them. They have them at least for every hour of the day and night. All the experiencings, however, of these aristocrats and xivocrats there, according to my observation, can be reduced to only 3 series. The first concerns the question of food. The second consists of the recollections associated with the former functionings of their sexual organs. And the third relates to the memories of their first nurse, and how the beings who have in all only 3 series of such experiencings could have the length of their existence the same as other beings on the surface of your planet will always be for me an insoluble puzzle. It is said that about this same puzzling question, that is, about how these terrestrial types managed to exist on the surface of the planet, even the great cunning Lucifer once grew very thoughtful, and he grew so intensely thoughtful that all the hairs of the tip of his tail turned quite gray. About these mentioned, so to say, jokes of nature, it remains for me only to attempt to explain to you why such a sharp difference exists there in the names of one and the same kind of being. I said attempt because I myself do not know exactly the cause of it. Yet, knowing the roots of both words from which these names were formed, I think I can presume with great certainty that it was obtained thanks to a certain custom existing there. I must tell you that your favorites there, for some reason or other, delight in sometimes arranging what are called puppet shows. For some reason or other, it always pleases them that these same xivocrats or aristocrats should also take part in these puppet plays of theirs, and accordingly they drag them also into these puppet shows. As these beings there are in themselves already quite vacuous, and consequently feeble, it becomes necessary during these puppet shows for other beings of the given community to support them. And simply from the method of their supporting, that is to say, by which arm they are supported, the difference in name was obtained. In the communities, namely, where monarchic state organization exists, it has already long ago been the custom to support them with the right arm, and hence in these communities such types are called aristocrats. And in the communities in which a republican state organization exists, they are supported with the left arm, and hence they are called Xevrocrats. Concerning in general a similar difference in the names there of terrestrial beings, another remarkable saying of our wise Mullah Nasr ad-Din comes to my mind, which he himself once told me personally. Once we spoke about the difference in the legal proceedings and in the sentences passed between the Turkish and Persian Qazi, that is, magistrates, and concerning the equality of their justice. He then said, "Ek, my dear friend, is there such a thing anywhere on earth as a wise legal examination of men's guilt? The Qazi are the same everywhere, only their names are different. In Persia they are called Persian, in Turkey Turkish. And that is just as it is everywhere on earth. Donkeys are alike. They are only differently called. For instance, the species of donkey breeding in the Caucasus is called Karabagian, and precisely the same kind of donkey breeding in Turkestan is called Khorasanian." And this wise sentence of his was thereafter always imprinted in my brain, and during my existence on your planet I always remembered it when I had any comparison to make. May his name be praised forever on that planet where he arose and was formed. And so, my boy, I repeat once more, if for some reason or other you have to be on their planet, bear always in mind that the weakness about which I have told you is most strongly developed in the most ordinary intelligensics there, and in those who ordinarily spring from them and belong to one or another of the enumerated castes, with the names ending in "crat."